Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, and welcome to Eye on Islam, the show where we look at current affairs through an Islamic lens. Each week, we'll look at a trending news story which has a direct relevance to the religion of Islam, and we'll break it down from a Muslim perspective. Today, we're going to ask the question, what does it mean to be a man from an Islamic point of view? At the moment, everyone seems to be talking about masculinity because of the controversy surrounding new Muslim convert Andrew Tate, an ex-kickboxer and social media personality who has, let's say, a traditional Muslim view of gender roles.
Famous social media personality Andrew Tate has been arrested in Romania over allegations including human trafficking. Tate rose to prominence across the globe for his inflammatory talks and hard-hitting opinions on masculinity and the gender roles of both men and women.
Do you think women are the property of men?
No. The point I was making...
Why have you said they are?
Because I made a religious point. I said that when a man marries a woman, the woman's father walks her down the aisle, and hands her away to the man. Traditionally, this is what it says in the Bible. I'm a religious person. I believe in God. Then why the fuck you spend time...
Some of his views have been described as misogynistic and even dangerous. However, Tate's recent conversion to Islam has sparked a debate among Muslims as to Islam's position on gender roles. Traditionally, Muslim women are honored as homemakers and child raisers, while men are head of the household, serving as both protectors and providers. Mothers especially are noted for having the keys to heaven under their feet. However, wives are informed to be respectful of their husband's leadership, while men are required to lower their gaze. But Muslim men are permitted to marry more than one wife. Women, on the other hand, are only permitted one husband. Modern concepts emerging from the West are challenging traditional family values and encouraging gender role changes, putting many Western worldviews at odds with Islamic values.
Well, joining us in the studio today to talk about masculinity and gender roles in Islam, we have Fahima Mahomed, a life coach and presenter for British Muslim TV. And joining us on Skype is Shaikh Tauqir Ishak, an international lecturer in Islamic sciences and currently the head of Halal certification for the Halal Regulatory Commission. Welcome to the show to both of you. Fahima, I'm going to come straight to you, our in-studio guest. Fahima, in your eyes, what does it make to be a true Muslim man?
Very interesting question, and I think it's really important that we understand that what makes a true Muslim male is the fact that they understand their faith very well. They know what it represents, they know the meaning of the responsibilities and the rights that they have to adhere to. So I think at the end of the day, we need to educate men in their roles so that they can represent that when they are out in society, whether it's in the workforce, whether it's in the families, and especially in their relationships, because that's like, you know, the household, the unit that they actually are sort of like, you know, procreating and creating future generations. And I think we also misrepresent a male's role because we are comparing it to other people in society that we are living, especially in the West, and people are getting confused. But I don't see any confusion for any man if they were to know their deen very well.
Sure, and obviously Islam has its view on what men and women and gender roles should be, and then there's also a Western worldview which is quite contrary to that. Sheikh, let me bring you in on this now and tell me, in your opinion, what does Islam teach us about masculinity? And of course, perhaps you could refer to Islamic examples like, of course, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes, do you know what these terms, masculinity and femininity, I don't recognize these terms actually in Islam. I think what's happened is the West has adopted, or the non-Muslims have adopted these terms to represent their own ideas. So masculinity is, for example, how muscular you are and how wealthy you are and how rich you are and how many abs you have and how much iron you can pump and etc., etc. And femininity is how much you can show of your body and how flirty you are and how many likes you get for wearing a very revealing dress, etc. These are completely alien to Islam. In Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has defined the roles and given responsibilities for both. In Islam, a man is a man, and a woman is a woman. I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, but that's a fact. And these basic facts have become confused. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى. We have made you from a male and a female. And within that comes all the roles and responsibilities which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with.
Now, obviously, we don't want this show to end up discussing Andrew Tate purely. He's more of a peg for us to open up the discussion about the beautiful religion of Islam, which is what we're all about here. But obviously, you know, some things he has said has resonated with Muslims. It seems to be the case. Fahima, the Quran says that men have a status over women, for example, and that's something which Andrew Tate has also emphasized in some of his talks. Perhaps you could just tell me, how do you interpret that?
I think when we talk about how we interpret the Quran, and again, like how the Sheikh has mentioned, in today's society, it is very much misconstrued sometimes. It doesn't mean, because a lot of people might look at that as like some sort of, you know, attack or dehumanizing a woman. It's not about that, because we know that when we are bringing sort of that sort of status and we're saying that quote and terminology, it's only because they are given that leadership role to protect the other half, not to be above, like how people would interpret that, or the fact that they are, you know, worth more and the woman is worth less. And I think people are not giving an understanding to that meaning. And that's where the problem lies. We say a sentence from the Quran and we say certain things, and we're not actually understanding its true essence. And like the Sheikh mentioned as well, you know, at the end of the day, we are here to support each other and alliance with each other, not to go against each other or one up on each other. And that's what we're trying to do in today's society, which is really the problem. And that's why I said at the beginning, we have to know our deen very well in order to understand this, so we don't get mixed up with what is happening around us today in the Western and secular world, which a lot of our Muslims are living at, and we're not being taught, and we're not looking at Islam in a way that it should be. Because we're taught in rituals, we're taught just to memorize things and practice certain things, but not really understanding it to its core.
But what about things that are known in Islam, like, for example, the sense of a husband's ownership over his wife and children, for example, things which, from a Western viewpoint, would be seen as, say, misogynistic?
But again, is that word ownership only to say that he is responsible? Right? Because again, we got to look at responsibility with rights. It's ownership, meaning that he's responsible for that child. So he has to provide for that child. He has to give that maintenance. Okay, that's again, that word is going to look at it like as if, you know, he is, you know, like taking control. He's not. He's actually taking responsibility and taking care. So again, we have to break down these words as to what it really means, so that people do understand that he's not going to run away like we have problems in the West, okay? We have, even if the marriage or that relationship breaks, he still has to provide for those children and he has to take responsibility. That's what it means.
Sheikh, let me come back to you on this. Obviously, the Quran talks about the status of men above women and that type of thing. Perhaps you could elaborate on that point. What exactly does Islam say about the status of man over woman?
I think it's about a level of responsibility and duty and accountability. You see, for example, if you have a position of responsibility, you have to be accountable for that in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'll give you one example of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, whereby after he passed away, one of his relatives had a dream about him and said, "How is your condition in Akhirah?" And he said, "My accountability for my position has just finished." And this is after 10 years. So he said, "I've been asked about every single decision I've made as a person with my responsibility." So being a husband, being a wife, being married, being a Muslim, all these have responsibilities and accountabilities. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. You are accountable because you have more duties and responsibility. There's no ownership here. There's a partnership. And in a marriage, there is beauty and taqwa in this partnership. I'll just give you one more example about the beauty of marriage, because marriage is for some reason, is a backward tradition now in the modern world. The Prophet ﷺ, he sent one of his companions to his blessed daughter, Hazrat Fatima, and his blessed son-in-law, Hazrat Ali, radiallahu ta'ala anhuma. And he said, give this to them. And this companion came back a little bit late. And the Prophet asked him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, why are you so late? And the companion was a little bit embarrassed. And the Prophet smiled, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and said, I'll tell you why you're late. You were impressed with the beauty of the relationship you saw between my daughter and my son-in-law. The way they interacted, the way they spoke, the way they worked together. That is a beauty of a marriage. That is a beauty of a partnership. And in a marriage and in a partnership, there is mashwara, there is discussion, and there is agreement. You can't run a marriage or anything via dictatorship. That does not work. Okay, so there's agreement, there is discussion.
Would it be fair, Sheikh, to say that obviously the man has some kind of position where he does have a final say on some topics, for example? Would that be the case?
I think that's the case in most cultures and in most marriages, not just in Islam. But when you say in some cases, you're absolutely right. 99, if you look at any marriage, and I do a lot of counseling in marriage, in many marriages, 99.9% of the time, the decisions are agreed. They're because in some cases, the wife knows more on that subject than the husband. In another case, the husband knows more about the subject than the wife. And that's how the world works. That's how marriages work. That's how families work. And that's we are gonna
pause. I'm gonna jump in, Sheikh. Unfortunately, we are going to continue the discussion, but there's another take on this that we're going to look at now. We did speak to people on the streets of London to speak and hear what their views about Andrew Tate and masculinity are, as well as the social media world too. We did speak to both men and women on the streets of London. Some men did say that they supported what Andrew Tate says by and large, but they didn't feel comfortable to express those views on camera.
Opinion on the streets of London about Andrew Tate and so-called toxic masculinity is as divided as it is on social media.
I grew up with men mainly, so I hear from them how much they suffer. We're not allowing men to be men anymore, about what men do, what they don't do, and it's not easy. I mean, in this country it might be a bit different. I'm from Spain, and most of my friends are even afraid to go out in the night because they don't know what they're going to find.
A man has told me that he feels not confident, and his interpretation of how he felt around me was emasculated, because he described me as, oh, you're an independent woman.
I'm a Christian, and I believe in my faith that I said woman, she's the help of a man. As a man, there are things that men can do, woman cannot do. And there are things that woman can do that men cannot do.
I think all the male attributes that he talks about are quite dated.
No, I don't think men are being emasculated by women. I think men have become a bit self-indulgent and a bit lazy and they're not pulling their weight. I don't think by women being able to be educated and go to work and having rights not to be sexually harassed or bullied or, domestic violence, to be subjected to domestic violence is emasculating a man in any way. I think there's still some very good men out there and who are supporting women, who have supported women, who are still being very strong men. They're still good family men. They're still bringing up their children well. They're still going to work. They're still paying their tax. They're still being good husbands. So I don't think women are having, some rights is in any way, emasculating men at all.
On social media, the debate about Andrew Tate and masculinity rages. As he went to court recently, he was pictured with a Quran in his hand, with many praying his followers are guided to Islam. On the other hand, many Muslims say Tate has not atoned for past sins. This tweeter says while men need to have strong masculine role models, Andrew Tate is not that person. But this tweeter disagrees, saying males have been emasculated by modern society, something which needs to be redressed.
Well, they have it, views from online and London's streets as well, just to add fuel to this conversation. Now, Fahima, I'm going to come back to you. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to let you in on a little secret of mine. When I come home, I like my dinner cooked. I like a woman who's good in the household, takes care of the kids, and ultimately I'm out providing and doing my job as a man should do, earning a living, putting food on the table. Now, some might say that those are sexist views, but to me that seems like a good, wholesome marriage situation. Do you not agree that there is kind of a role for women in the household and it's a good role, a respectable role that should be maintained?
I completely understand where you're coming from. I was kind of brought up in the same way. And, you know, even now with whatever society is stating, I automatically have been conditioned in that way myself. I do speak to a lot of other families as well as I do coach, you know, in relationships and marriages too. But I do find that the men and women's roles have changed, even in the household, as you mentioned. And as easy as it is for you to say that,
how so have they changed?
It has changed where, you know, women are working, so men are probably doing some of the dishes and doing some of the women sort of, you know, chores and responsibilities as well, which is, again, agreed by both parties. And they respect that. If you have a problem with that, then obviously you don't go into that marriage and the relationship in the first place. So I think people are more and more changing, and I think the roles I have seen generally is changing for men and women. To some extent, people might think of it as in not so good because, again, it might look as, you know, the man is not actually being masculine anymore. But I don't think if you are a masculine male, you can never be sort of like, you know, not masculine in that sense, no matter what the influence is.
Because I think what we're seeing now is a rising trend in divorces, even among Muslims as well.
That's a separate issue, I think.
Really?
I think so.
So you don't think it's a case of, say, the roles being confused?
No, I think it's a different issue.
Women not prioritising the home over their career that could be breaking down, men changing their role as well, like the stay-at-home dad situation. You don't think that any of that's contributing to the divorce?
I think it can contribute if it's not discussed in the beginning, and it's obviously changed throughout where they didn't agree at the beginning, fair enough. But I think there's a lot more deeper issues for divorces regardless of that, because there's a lot of, you know, families that I know that are staying together and they're absolutely fine regardless of the, you know, the differences in the gender. I think it's much more deeper issues where they don't know themselves, they're not aware, and they're not actually happy with each other because they're not happy within. I think it's a lot more deeper than that, and a lot more other external factors that do come involved with regards to the divorce rate, where, you know, whether the woman or the male is not putting, you know, that 100% towards the actual family, home, and each other. And they're comparing, and there's so many other issues involved in that.
Sure. Now, Sheikh, I'm going to come back to you on this topic. It seems to me that there's a modern push, particularly from the Western world, to make men much more emotional than perhaps they were historically. You know, men should cry, they should let their feelings out, get in touch with their feminine side, so to speak. What do you think of this? Is this like un-Islamic in your view? Is this unnatural for men?
Do you know what? There's no such thing as a feminine side for men or a masculine side for women. Men are men, women are women. But in terms of emotions and crying, look, we are all human. And human comes from the Arabic word insan. And the insan comes from two words, nasiya, which means to forget, and ins or uns, which means emotion or love. So we are full of emotion. In fact, we are emotions fused together with clay, which is a very difficult partnership on its own. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, he cried numerous times. For example, once he was making dua and he said, Ya Allah, ummati, ummati, and then wabaka, and then he was weeping because he was crying for his ummah. And Jibreel alayhi salam came to him and said, why are you crying, O Prophet ﷺ? He said, I'm worried about my ummah. And he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always give you to make you happy for your ummah. So he was crying when his son died, Ibrahim died. He was crying. And Hazrat Umar, radiallahu ta'ala, one of the strongest men we know, when he went to someone's grave, he started crying so much that his beard was covered with tears. And the Prophet also said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that on the Day of Judgment, one of the people who will be given shade will be that person who in seclusion cries out of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I would say if a man has not cried because of his iman, then his iman needs attention. That is not a feminine thing, that is an Islamic thing, that is an iman thing. And just finally, we all are born crying because Iblis comes, he doesn't like us being born, he doesn't like our innocence. So he touches us when we're born. And from hadith we find that's why babies cry. A few people he was not allowed to touch, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. So crying is part of being human. It's not a masculine thing or a feminine thing. It's a human thing.
Very well. So I guess men can cry. That's good to know. I wanted to ask you, Fahima, about your view, because obviously you've mentioned about the female view, particularly in marriage as well. But what do you expect from a man? Like, you know, from a husband figure, for example. Surely you want a kind of strong man who's going to take the reins, pay the bills, that kind of masculine figurehead. Isn't that what women want ultimately, or do you think that that's changing now?
I can't speak for everyone, but I do speak to a lot of people, and personally myself, no matter what, however many women might deny or say what they want, I personally do find it attractive to have an alpha male, someone who is, you know, walks into the room and can own it. They do have that sort of like, you know, masculine side where they are in control, they are, you know, ambitious, and they are actually holding their own, and they can provide for their families. I find that really attractive, and I don't know which women wouldn't find that attractive, to be fair.
So do you think the type of thing that Andrew Tate puts out there is the kind of ideal man
I
figure?
think it depends how he kind of interprets that, you know. I mean, there's certain bits of it where you would say that, you know, he's kind of like, you know, pushing women to one side maybe, or other things where he's actually in line with, you know, Islam.
But isn't he doing what you said? He's taking the reins, he's, you know, he's macho, that kind of thing. So it seems like, where's the issue here? Surely Andrew Tate is some kind of ideal husband figure.
It depends, because it means like, you know, can they also be sort of like respectful to that, you know, female, if they are in that way as well, because we also have a voice, we also have opinions. Sure. So, you know, you can't just take it from that sort of point of view where they're just in control and they tell you what to do. It's more about having that role, but having the respect for you and your opinions as well, and allowing you that space to, you know, say that. The other thing I want to add, you know, we talk about men and women and masculine and feminine. At the end of it, we've got to understand the science and the biology behind it, and studying neuroscience as well. You know, men and women, we think with both brains, but the left is logical, and men normally thinks like that. The women with right side of the brain, more intuitive and emotional, and men have more.
We are unique.
Yeah,
we're different.
Exactly.
We're not equal in all cases. Would you say?
Exactly. There's even neurotransmitters in the brain which is released more in men, which is serotonin, which is 52 or 4% more than women, which means that they are more happier, and, you know, they basically analyze less, and our brains are much more busier. So we need to understand ourselves a little bit more about these things. We haven't
got long left. I want to bring the Sheikh in for a final reaction. Just over a minute, Sheikh. Tell me, what are your views on Andrew Tate before we wrap up?
Well, I think his narrative is a reaction to what's happening. There's so much confusion in the West. Feminists hate men, but they want to be like men. Men don't know if they're men or women. People don't know what gender they are anymore. And this confusion is because they've rejected Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So his narrative is a reaction. And as soon as he became a Muslim, all right, then he basically got arrested, and he's being condemned left, right, and centre.
Well, thank you, Sheikh, and thank you, Fahima. I think we have a little bit of time left. Do you have any final comments that you'd like to say on the Andrew Tate saga?
The Andrew Tate saga, I think, you know what, he's a celebrity, and, you know, may give him time to prove himself, and don't just get carried away with the influences out there, because I think there's a lot of general Muslims out there that also can be given more, and there's more meaning and purpose behind this, but, you know, we don't need to jump on the bandwagon.
Sure. Well, thank you very much to you, Fahima, and to the Sheikh on Skype as well. Thank you for everyone. We've had a great show today. I think we've covered a lot of ground. And of course, the story of Andrew Tate is still playing out. So we have to wait and see how that goes. Perhaps we'll report on it again. But ultimately, our main focus here is to talk about the religion we love the most, which is Islam, rather than news or geopolitics. But thank you to everyone at home for watching as well. It's been another great show. And tune in again next week for another edition of Eye on Islam. But for the time being, it's Salamu Alaikum.